goes? Yes. Here we go. Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lipson and our guest. Do you want to present our guest?
Yeah.
Say our guest.
Our guest is Claire Asuka, who is a school teacher from UTLA. She's been on strike, and now they are no longer on strike. They reached an agreement with the district and made some gains. And we were hoping to talk to her about her experience, about the strike, and just get as much information as we can about what has just happened, because no matter what you think about the agreement, the fact that these teachers went on strike is going to be, there's a whole host of, it's great for us, basically. It's great for teachers across the country, and starts us hopefully down a road of more strikes in the future. I have known Claire at least since 2010, the budget cuts work here in California, where you were a student activist at the time, I think, and I was impressed with her then. She seemed more like an anarchist, but just very honest, very forthright, brave, and I've always been impressed with her just willingness to speak her mind in any form. And I've known her since that time. We've worked together in some groups and some political work, but now she's in LA, and we actually have worked together around the strike because my school, Mission High School, was adopted your school, and we sent you some money, and we got some really great pictures from you, and it was a great experience for our school to be connected to your school during the strike. It made us feel like we were part of what you were doing there. So I very much appreciate, Claire, your willingness to do this interview, and I'm very excited to do this today.
I'm excited to get to know you more, Claire, and to know more about the LA strike. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, just briefly, what you teach, where you teach?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you for having me on. So I teach in Koreatown, Los Angeles. The school that I teach at is kind of this interesting project that came out of both education reform movement in Los Angeles to give communities more voice in education, and also the work of the UCLA School of Education. So it's a pilot school. It's a dual immersion school in English, Korean, Spanish. And it's a K-12 school, and it's in a heavily immigrant, heavily working class neighborhood. So we're an immigrant working class community. We have a really strong UTLA chapter. UTLA was part of creating this school. I'm really lucky to teach there. So for me personally, I grew up in the city, and I've wanted to be a teacher for as long as I can remember. And that's because when I was a student here in Los Angeles, I saw through my work as a young organizer against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and against police brutality, how teachers can play this kind of fundamental role as a nexus between historical memories of struggle and then the current struggles that are starting to bubble up in communities. And I wanted to do that, and now I'm doing it. I'm a world history and geography teacher.
So you mentioned can you expand on your politics a little bit, your personal politics?
So this is my second strike. When I was in high school as a student, I got my first job. It was at a grocery store, and within 4 months, all of the grocery stores in Southern California went on strike. This was like 2003, 2004. It was 70,000 workers on strike, and we were on strike for 5 months. And for me, that was a really formative experience of seeing the power that working people can have. And that shaped my political orientation ever since. It's been directed at building and trying to create space for that power and that consciousness to develop. Andy already mentioned that we got to know each other through the movement for public education and against austerity in 2008 through 2010, 2012. And so what I'm doing now as an educator, fighting back for better education and to defend our public services and expand them, feels like a continuation of what I've been doing for a very long time, of being in this fight for public services and using those public services as a way to galvanize public consciousness about what it means to have quality living conditions and quality educational conditions.
And in this discussion, obviously there's been a lot of events in the last day of settling the strike and discussions around the contract and things like that. Would you prefer to talk about where you've been, or do you want to start from the front and go backwards? Do you have a preference?
I think it's helpful I would be interested in giving a lot of context about what the experience of the strike was, and then maybe getting into the details of what came out of it, right, okay, and where we're at now.
So let's start, in your mind, with what were the major issues that led, let's go backwards then. What were the major issues that led to this strike?
Yeah, so I think it's three things. A lot of it is local conditions, but the unignorable and fundamental reality is that things have changed nationally, and that creates space for this. So at a local level, funding for public education and support for public education has been in a death spiral for several years, going back really to the austerity measures of 2008. Because since then, the death spiral has just continued. And what does it look like? It looks like a district that's broke on purpose and is hoarding money and very visibly doing so. And it looks like a board of education whose clear mission by majority is to defund and dismantle our public education system. So that's a very demoralizing reality. Educators here have been sitting with that for a long time and have been accepting it in a lot of ways for a long time. But what's fundamentally changed is there's been a significant upsurge in working class struggles in the last year or two. There's been a significant upsurge nationally in teacher struggles. And what that's led to is an actual national consciousness of what the conditions in public schools are, and that those aren't just one district's reality, that this is the national consensus from the political elites about what we should accept in our public schools. And then this consciousness of what it means to be a teacher, and that being to fight for our communities and fight for our students, and to use our ability to strike to do that. That's changed things. It has transformed teachers' expectations and their self-image, and that's huge. And the third thing is, in Los Angeles, for the first time in 30 years, we have a union leadership who was willing to strike. That is major. Not only were they willing to strike, but a union leadership and a much expanded union organizing base, skilled enough to build a strong strike. And I believe we had a very strong strike. So those are the things that got us to this point. I mean, there are specific demands, there are specific conditions, but I think those things created the space for any of that to matter.
Some of the specific demands, I'll just say the ones I know of, were some class size demands, restriction on charter schools, additional counselors, additional librarians, additional nurses needed.
5 days a week, not just once a week.
Yes, and then also there were some rules about like one thing I heard about was students being searched randomly and things like that.
Yeah.
So maybe can you add anything more to that? Like that last one I wasn't really sure about as well, or you know.
So there were formal contractual demands that included a raise, which was really, I mean, it was quite small. It was for a 6.5% raise, which isn't even a cost of living adjustment. But it was something that teachers were comfortable taking to create space for other things, right? The really big ones that were going to be in our contract had to do with teacher power at the school site over testing and curriculum, in addition to just huge increases in staffing, right? Asking for fully staffed schools, including promoting a community school model, and asking for more community schools to be created, right? So that with that came the nurses, the librarians, the counselors. But in addition to that, we had more than 30 community demands that were created through this process of meeting with community organizations and thinking about how this community school model could become a model that thinks about students holistically. So ending random searches, which is something in Los Angeles, administrators are mandated to conduct at least one random search a day at every school in the district.
This is for high school, I presume, not elementary.
On high school.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And middle school, very quickly. And what about middle school?
Middle school is included.
As well,
random
right.
searches at middle schools,
Wow.
yes. So this is a demand that was very important to students, especially because one of the main student organizations in Los Angeles, Students Deserve, has had this as a campaign for a long time. But there were other things that I think were very important demands, things like metro passes for students that would allow them to ride for free on all the public transportation systems in the city. There's another demand about immigration defense fund that we asked the district to set up. We also asked the district to do a evaluation of all the properties that it owns and to designate specific properties that had not yet been developed for affordable housing that LAUSD families would be given priority for. So that was another very important one that stuck with me. And I mean, there's many more. Yeah. It was like very broad.
Yeah. Well, if I may, if you students demanding, what group or what group is organizing alongside with teachers that are students or making these demands as well? I did not know that. I think a lot of people would be unaware of that. Usually the LA strike was focused mostly on teachers, but it seems students were participating as well.
Yes. So there's a student organization in Los Angeles called Students Deserve, and it's active at about 19 campuses in the city. And it has worked with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles and the ACLU and a few other legal organizations to craft demands around ending criminalization. And the one that has been most prominent is ending random searches and replacing them with restorative justice measures that are fully funded and supported with like restorative justice coordinators and things.
Can you say more about two things about the strike, preparation for the strike? Can you talk about how you felt, what was most important for the UTLA union to prepare for the strike and getting itself ready for strike? And what was most important for you to do at your site to prepare for the strike?
Okay, yes. So UTLA, from the outset, put in place a lot of pieces to build this as a community strike. 2 years ago, they asked every school in the district, every UTLA chapter to appoint a parent liaison who would start to organize with parents. They sat down with community organizations to build the demands. They opened up bargaining sessions and invited community members to come. It wasn't a full open invitation. They had community organizations designate representatives to be there, but it was something that had never been done before. And so that was, I think, one of the fundamental pieces that made that, coupled with the broadening of the demands, made this strike very powerful in terms of educators. Hold on one second. My throat is so sorry. I'm going to keep clearing it. It's just
we can cut it.
Week of chanting, and it's like rubbed raw. Okay. All right. I think I'm back. So that piece was something that, as a union, we haven't done before. And the other piece that was really important was, when our current leadership came into power, we were a very demobilized union. And our union built up multiple levels of rank and file engagement. I wouldn't say, I think there's a lot of work to be done on the democratization of the union front. But on the organizational structures and mobilization front, there was a lot that was done well. They asked every site to set up a contract action team. So it went from being a chapter chair at every site, which was the goal, 4 years ago was a chapter chair at every site, to within the last year, the contract action team at every site with a representative in every department or den or division, who was then helping to organize members to participate.
And just to be clear, a chapter chair is like a shop steward, the union representative at the site who works at that site and is elected probably out of that site. Is that correct?
That is right. Our chapter chairs are rank and file members who we elect to lead our site-specific chapters. And we have these area meetings. So the city's divided into, I think, 4 areas. And so chapter chairs come to these area meetings. For the longest time, I've gone to many of these. They have just been a talk shop where the union just talks at members. Yeah. They feed people dinner, and people literally barely greet each other, and then they leave. In the last 2 years, they've done a lot of work to transform those into actual organizing spaces where chapter chairs, where it's gone from this meeting in a bag type thing where you just pick up your chapter chair bag and it has everything that you're supposed to do at your 20-minute meeting that week, to just a series of questions and chapter chairs turning to each other and talking about what they're going to do about those questions and dilemmas. So that's built our capacity, and they open those meetings. They've always been open, but they widely invited CAT team members to participate. So for my school, it went from one chapter chair going to those meetings to, on the regular, 5 to 6 people attending. So those things were really, really big for building our capacity to strike. And we saw that in the huge turnout. Did you want me to talk about how we actually organized the strike itself as part of this?
Whichever, I think if you feel like that's helpful, either at your site or how UTLA did it, whichever you choose, just whatever.
So, at our site, in the last 3 months, the reality of the strike has become a lot clearer. And so in the last couple months before going back to, I would say, October, we started to talk about what the strike would look like for us. We have a complicated site. We have, it's very large. There's 6 different schools at the site, each completely autonomous from the other one. And all of those 6 schools had different union cultures, union structures, etc. So we started to have cross-chapter chair meetings, something that hadn't happened. Those weren't universally successful, but it was an initiative that we started. We started to have parent meetings and large community meetings to talk about what this fight was about and to organize it and to bring the parents in as much as we could from the beginning. We set up, out of our union chapter, we set up 8 different committees to deal with all the logistical things of the strike. And a lot of that work happened over the winter break. And a lot of it was very, very logistical, like where are we going to park?
Right.
to use the restroom?
Right.
Where will we be able to put our stuff when we can't take it home? What time do delivery trucks arrive? Where do they enter through? What are the most important places of all the, I think we have 13 entrances to our school. So of all of those, if we can be in a few of those places, where are the places that we are going to be? So there's a lot of that very logistical work that allowed us in the last week, 2 weeks before the strike, to be freed up to deal with a lot of the political questions. And so that was very important that we prepared that early on. And then in terms of just going into the strike, it was just every day reassessing at the end of the day. We have text message lines set up well in advance. And every day, the chapter chair was meeting with the other chapter chairs in one corner. Picket captains were meeting in another corner. We had designated roles on every single one of our 5 picket lines. So there was picket captain of the picket line. There was police liaisons for the picket line, which required a lot of discussions about that role. There was a vehicle outreach person who would approach vehicles in the street before they got to our site to try to turn them around. There were parents and chat leaders. And those are the fundamental roles. So every single picket line had those. And we had 5 different picket lines. And those people would meet at the end of the day, debrief, come up with their own ideas of what needed to happen differently, and then they would take those to the chapter chairs.
I'm curious if there was opposition amongst teachers to this strike, because I had been in the union at SFUSD before. We had also many times had tried to have a strike here in San Francisco, and there was opposition, and there wasn't enough votes for a strike. I remember, what year was that, Andy?
Well, yes.
The most recent, I remember.
We would vote to strike, but our leadership would settle, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of resistance, I think, among our members to strike.
What was the pushback? Anything that you felt from the opposite? Maybe some teachers felt uncomfortable. Some teachers did not want to participate, join you all. Can you speak about that?
I think so. I've been in conversations in this union now for 6 years about striking. Since I started teaching 6 years ago, we have talked about striking pretty much every year, and every time our contract has been open. And in past years, there's been a ton of fear and a ton of pessimism about whether this could work. A ton of, people have a lot of trauma that they bring to these conversations, especially people who've been in this district a long time, right? My school in particular, a lot of the teachers teaching there are from schools that were basically dismantled, right? So they've been through those experiences. There's a lot of just fear of even trying to fight back because losing is painful. People don't want to expose themselves to that. And I think what I mentioned earlier about the way that this national movement starting in West Virginia, right, seeing teachers go on illegal strikes against their own union leaderships, right, has changed things. There's no better evidence of that than seeing my coworkers who every year have come to this conversation with so much fear suddenly be so willing to consider striking, and suddenly feeling like this is what teachers do. This is how we fight back. This is how we make gains. I'm still processing how we got to the point where people were feeling that way, but I can tell you that in the months before the strike, every conversation was just how do we get to a strike, not how do we avoid it.
One other thing to ask, and this has been an issue for us, is maybe the role of and the participation of paraprofessionals, teaching assistants, and stuff like that. are there specific issues that are brought for them? This is a very underpaid group in our union. They are within our union, so they're part of the same union, and they get literally half the pay I get, even though they work in the same classroom doing the same type of work. People make excuses about them not being credentialed. It's nonsense. I didn't hear much about the issue of paraprofessionals and in this contract. Where did that feature in this fight?
So paraprofessionals are not in our union.
Okay.
They are in SEIU, which is the same union that represents our groundskeepers, our custodial staff, our cafeteria workers. So, and their union is very disorganized. They threatened to strike last semester. For the first time, they did a strike authorization vote. It was a very important moment for them because most of them had no idea that they were in a union prior to, like a couple weeks before they were doing a strike authorization vote. And one of the things that I think our union did right in the build up to this strike was that they declared very publicly that if SEIU struck, we would go on sympathy strike. And that declaration, within 24 hours of that declaration, the district settled with SEIU. So that was important, but there is a long history of lack of solidarity between UTLA and SEIU that runs both ways. From what I understand, prior to the recession, we bargained together, and we would try to line up our contracts. And during the recession, on both sides, there was an agreement to no longer do that. And since then, there's just been no collaboration, essentially. So this was a first step. So there were no demands related to paraprofessionals because they're not in our union. And SEIU did a lot to discourage a solidarity strike from their members. They actually gave their members, I think first they said 48, then I heard they reduced it to 24 hours, where they said, if you want to go on sympathy strike with UTLA, you need to have 80% of the members at your site sign this petition within 24 hours. And if you don't get that number, you are not sympathy striking. We had the chapter chairs turn in those petitions, and I heard that they turned down a large number of them because people didn't meet the deadline. So my site was one of only 10 in the whole district where SEIU workers went on sympathy strike with us.
Yeah. And how many schools are in your district?
I think the most recent, UTLA keeps saying more than 900. Today LA Times said 1,200. It's a lot.
Yeah. So that's a very few that were able to get that organizing and overcome their union's resistance.
Yes, and just like in San Francisco, our paraprofessionals have horrible working conditions. They have really insignificant wages, and so for them to sympathy strike with us for 6 days with no pay was just a huge sacrifice. Yeah. I mean, I would say that's probably one of the biggest victories of the strike. However, at the same time, one of our failures as a union is that we did not organize other unions to respect the line. And so we had members of SEIU obviously crossing our picket lines. We had members of IBW, the Teamsters crossing.
That would be for truck deliveries and stuff like that?
Truck deliveries, repairs at schools. That piece was definitely missing.
Can you speak about the parent support in all of this? I can imagine many parents felt during this time, where do they place their children, especially when you leave your children most of the day and you go to work as a parent. And I'm wondering about their support and their response to the strike.
So like many public service unions, UCLA's conception of a strike is very much like picket lines are a way to do outreach and a way to be visible. They are not hard defenses of a site against scabs or anything like that, right? And in UCLA's conception, which I don't think they're wrong in this, to win the strike, we need massive, massive, massive public support, right? So teachers' biggest anxiety going into this strike was, would parents support? Or would parents feel betrayed? And honestly, if parents had felt betrayed and had expressed that, teachers would have turned around and they would not have struck, because they were so concerned with ensuring that this was a strike that was felt to be a shared strike of our community. And luckily, that was not the case. There was a poll that came out in the midst of the strike that said 82% of the city supported the strike, and some very small fraction did not. It was like less than 10% of people in the city felt that they actually did not support the strike. So that's incredible. I mean, that's huge. Yeah, so parents played a huge role on the picket line. The support wasn't just in polls, right? We saw it every single day on our picket line with parents coming out and actually marching with us, right, throughout the day. So the last day of the strike, just to give an example from my picket line, the last day of the strike, we had all 55 of our teachers and counselors out on the picket line, right? Then we had 75 community members who actually went up to our chapter chair and checked themselves in as also being on the picket line. And from what I know about, from talking to people, most of our community members had no idea they were supposed to check in. So my estimate is we were at well over 100 parents and students on the picket line with us just on that day. And that was definitely not the day of highest parent representation. On the regular, I would say for every teacher on the picket line, we had 2 to 3 parents on the picket line with us for hours. And I know it was way higher at schools where we have more parents with more stable income. My school is, our families are very precarious, right? So to come out on a picket line is a huge sacrifice for our families. And especially because we're an immigrant community, we probably had 1 police officer for every 3 picketers during the duration of the strike. I mean, we had a massive and very aggressive police presence at our school. So for immigrant families to come out on a picket line starting at 5 a.m. when it's dark outside and get pushed around by police and still stay, that's very significant.
And can you talk about the diversity of responses from the students? I believe, there were students I saw that went to metro stations, were picketing. You sent a picture of that. But I also believe that there might have been students who went to school, who crossed lines. How was that dealt with? What were the numbers like? What was the response? How was that handled?
Yeah, so certainly there were students who went to school, and there were parents who brought their kids to school, and we were very careful to not shame families for bringing their kids to school, because we know that in a society where childcare is not guaranteed, right, schools are the only free childcare that families have, and a lot of our families need that, especially a school with high homelessness rates. I mean, these kids just have nowhere to go, right, if they're not at school. So we took that into consideration. That's actually why we made sure to have parent liaisons at every entrance to talk to every single parent as they were coming in and answer their questions. And we invited kids who were inside school to participate in their own ways. And we tried to give them a menu of ways to participate. They could wear red. They could stand on the field and chant with us and watch us, right? And kids did that for the most part. I mean, once it stopped raining, pouring, the first 3 days, kids did come out and show their support. However, the overwhelming majority of families in Los Angeles did not send their kids to school. We had less than a third of kids show up the first day. And every day after that, the numbers just went down.
Wow.
And that's really incredible because the district told families, they organized these meetings where they corralled parents and they told them, your child will not receive their 100% attendance award if they do not come to school. If your child signed a senior graduation contract, which I guess some schools do, I wasn't aware of this, but I found out during the strike, they will not be able to receive that award.
Wow.
I mean, that they will not be able to graduate. They will have broken their senior contract.
Right.
And they said if you get up to 3 absences, you will be recommended for truancy. And from there, consequences can escalate. You can be brought before a court. This can show up in your immigration hearings, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, there were mixed messages that came out. Principals told us that they were actually secretly listing these days as non-instructional, that there was no system to take roll during the strike, right? So they weren't actually going to do that. Police captains came out and said they had no plans to issue any truancy tickets. So it was kind of this like wave of confusion around that.
Do you think it had to do in partly that the district was losing, what, 11,000 or something like that per student? You know, in a state that spends more money on inmates than students, you know, in a blue state, California, that was part of their plan to make students stay in schools, no?
Yes, and I think it was that. I think it was also about showing, because the district did all this work to get laptops to every school that was set up with online software. So I think it was also about showing, trying to make the case that teachers are not fundamental to an educational, that an educational experience can occur without a teacher, right? Via this online software.
And I think to try to get a stronger student presence to demoralize teachers and make them feel like they don't have that support like you spoke about. It was part of breaking the union and breaking the strike.
Yes, it definitely was. I think it backfired a lot because, I mean, our students, sent us video of themselves just in a classroom, and our principal was sitting in the hallway. She had 4 classrooms that she was just wandering into periodically, right? But there was one adult for 4 classrooms of essentially unattended kids, right? With nothing to do. So in that sense, it became very clear that this was not an educational space, right? And at that point, parents were angry. They felt they'd been lied to, right? And they felt they'd been threatened.
Right.
District.
Can you say more about the police presence at your site? And was that also something that many other sites experienced? Because I know that you told me there was a lot of police at your site because I think you had said your site did a pretty aggressive job of trying to stop trucks from coming in and delivering things, stuff like that. So can you say more about that? And what was the response of the other teachers to this large presence? So I'd like to know, was that generalized around the district, that large police presence? And what was the response your own teachers had to this large police presence?
Yes, right. So we had a ton of police. We had, at some moments, up to 13 different LAPD patrols, plus, 15 school police on duty for 11-hour shifts, right? Because we would get there at 5 a.m. and we would leave at 4 p.m. and at 5 a.m. they were already there waiting for us. From what I know, I don't know a single other site in the district that had that kind of police presence. I've talked to teachers at high schools that had actually very militant picket lines, and they had very little police presence. So I to this day do not know the answer to why we had such overwhelming police presence at our school. They sent school police from across the district to be at our school. Like, we asked the school police where they were from, and they were literally from every corner of the city. I think we were a very organized site. And I think we were very strong, but I don't think we were that much stronger than other schools to warrant that level of response. But the police presence was very, very, very discouraging. And we were not equipped to deal with it. And we didn't know our rights, right? So the first 3 days, school police blatantly lied to us about what our rights were. And it caused a lot of confusion. You know, on the one hand, there were people who were saying, no, this isn't what the union told us. We have the right to picket here. We have the right to walk on the sidewalk. We have the right to walk in the driveway and to delay cars. And then other people were just feeling very upset because the police were telling us that wasn't true and very inclined to go with what the police were saying, even if in their gut they felt they were being lied to. We had police tell us that we could not picket at all. We had police tell us that we couldn't set up, we couldn't walk in the driveways. We had police set up skirmish lines to block us from walking in the driveways. When we would try and approach cars, police would immediately surround the cars and beckon them in, literally gesturing for them to enter before they would talk to us. Police would shout, "Keep your window up," so they wouldn't talk to us. So that was really hard. I mean, our first day was a lot of standing behind police, trying to yell over them, right? And just getting nowhere. But we got it together. A lot of it was calling out the National Lawyers Guild to help us. They sent 3 legal observers every day to our school site to help document, and they helped file some of the legal complaints against the police. And they also told us things about our rights that we hadn't been aware of, right? So they told us, we knew we had this thing called reasonable delay rights, which is that when a car is entering, we can picket in front of them as long as we keep moving for quite a while, right? We have the right to delay them. We also have the right to try to talk to them without being interrupted by the police. And the police's role is not to be security for these cars and to get them into the school. Right, so they helped us understand what those rights were and then to begin to assert them. And once we did that, we saw the police, once they saw that we were organized and informed, they stepped back in a big way. In the last 2 days, they essentially just stood by and watched us all day. Yeah.
That's great.
What has eventually been the reaction at the local level, this starting from the district and then local government like the mayor and then statewide?
And the media too. Can you speak to the response from political officials, local and bigger, and then the media?
Yeah, starting locally.
Mm-hmm. So locally, the media was universally very condemning of the teachers union and the strike from the outset, not surprisingly. We had, just horrific coverage of the strike, especially from our city paper, the Los Angeles Times, which, our superintendent, Austin Butner, this guy who was voted in through this billionaire-driven campaign to take over the school board, he is the former publisher of the LA Times, right? So he is deeply embedded in the political and business elite of Los Angeles, and they were just ruthlessly willing to distort what the strike was about for a very long time. But that started to shift in the midst of the strike, which was interesting. Our local government, so our mayor, Eric Garcetti, has, as mayor, basically said nothing about education. He has no plan for education. I think one of the things that stunned me about big UTLA, the UTLA leadership's strategy for the strike, was that they did not put pressure on him to take a stand, right? And they seemingly were very careful to keep the attention focused on the school board and to not direct it at him, right? To not use this massive public support to force him to take a stand. Ultimately, the union asked Eric Garcetti to mediate the negotiations and to become involved, and they asked Gavin Newsom to do the same. And I think I have very mixed feelings about that. One, if he had been forced to take a stand far earlier, he most likely would have taken a stand that was very anti-union, and he would have not been in a position to then come in and try and mediate this. And so the fact that he was allowed to stay neutral and to just wait it out gave him a lot of political cover. And that's political cover that we're about to see him capitalize on when he announces his run for the presidency and tries to claim that he essentially crafted the deal that ended this strike. So I think that's unfortunate. I think that he was given a pass. In addition, the choice to allow him to take a role in mediation, I believe, and this is controversial, but I believe was disempowering for our union because he forced a confidentiality clause on the union and the district, and basically asked that both the union bargaining team and the district sit down to negotiate and not leave the table until they had an agreement. And so I think over a period of 48 hours, no, more than 48 hours, over like 4 days, they negotiated without being able to share with members anything that was happening in those negotiations. I know a lot of union activists who feel that this was positive because they feel that the district had been negotiating in the media, had been basically undermining our message by publicly confusing people about what was actually happening in negotiations. And so they saw this as a way to essentially muzzle the district. However, I don't think that's how it played out. I think what happened is there was incredible pressure on our union bargaining team to put something before the membership, right? And to see how the membership would vote and to do their best to sell it. And that's what happened. I don't think that the deal they put before us is a disaster, and I don't think it's concessionary, but I also don't think it's the best that we could have gotten. And I think the conditions of the negotiations contributed to that outcome.
Well, let's talk about the outcome now. So yesterday, we found out that your union had settled. What was your response personally, on your personal opinion?
So, I especially these last 5 days have started to, once the logistics of the strike were under control, I started to have a lot more space to think about how this was all going to end. And what I noticed from the beginning was that the union did a very good job of really arguing to members that every single step we had taken was a victory, that we were already winning, right? The fact that we struck for the first time in 30 years was a huge victory. The fact that we had massive public support was a huge victory. So despite everything, the rain and everything on the picket lines, the sense from the membership has been we are winning, and we are winning big for the past 5 days, right? And I wasn't sure how that was going to play out. I thought it could go two ways. One, it could go towards whatever they put before us as a tentative agreement must be a victory because we've been winning up to now, and this must be a victory too. Or it could go in the other direction, and the other direction being that we have allowed ourselves to dream. We have allowed ourselves to feel powerful. We've allowed ourselves to raise our expectations. And therefore, when we see whatever tentative agreement is put before us, we have the courage to say this isn't enough, right? I was hoping very much for that last outcome. And it's interesting, the day that the tentative agreement came out, yesterday, in the morning before we'd seen any details of it, our area representative gave us this glowing speech about what a massive victory it was, right? So that was, again, that same strategy of this is a victory, we're winning, we've won, right? And that strategy really turned on the union in the end. Because when in the morning at 9:30 in the morning, when we were hearing what the union was saying was in this contract, people were ecstatic, right? Parents were hugging us and crying, kids were crying. And then at 2 p.m., the actual agreement came out online. So the union had agreed months in advance of the strike on a formal process to close the strike, right? There were two fundamental things. One, we are not ending the strike until we vote, right? Members vote, we count the votes, and then we call off the strike if there's enough support. And two, we vote with parents, with community members and students on our picket lines, right? And we discuss on our picket lines, and they have a say. They don't have a vote,
right,
but they have a say,
yeah,
right? And so we honored that process at my site. At 2 p.m., the formal agreement came out, and we sat in a community circle in the driveway of our school, parents, students, teachers. We set up interpretation, and with two megaphones, we read through it clause by clause together, and we discussed it. And the immediate reaction was disappointment.
Yep.
The things that people really seized on were, one, not enough of a reduction in class size. There was a lot of concern about that. Two, not enough of not enough progress on the fight against charter schools, right? Nothing concrete that would force that issue. There were a lot of it says that the Board of Education of Los Angeles will vote to recommend to the governor of California to put on a cap on charter schools, right? Right. So for us reading that, a lot of people were like, with what leverage would we possibly enforce this outside of a strike? A really insignificant increase in counselors, right? It was 17 more counselors. So people saw those things and became very concerned. Certainly everybody recognized that what was on that paper was a victory that we had fought for and won, right? But at the same time, there were feelings that this victory was not proportionate to the level of strength we were exhibiting and that we had while we were on strike. And so we started to discuss it, and eventually we did like one person speaks for voting yes, one person speaks for voting no. We did that for a long time. And then around 4 o'clock, our union chapter chair and the area rep came back to our site. They had been in this intense union meeting about the contract, and they told us that there was a lot of confusion about what the class size actually meant, that it was better than it seemed because we could immediately, because we had removed the this clause that allowed the district to opt out in times of financial crisis, that meant we could immediately start grieving large class sizes, which at 100 schools in the district would mean that they'd immediately have to reduce class size. So essentially what happened was there was a ton of confusion about what we were actually voting on, right? We had our chapter chair explaining us one thing, we had another thing on the paper, and not enough clarification. People didn't even know how long the contract lasted for, right? Like, did it end in 2020? Did it end in 2022? What were the issues that would be reopeners that we could renegotiate between that time? But we voted at that time. And on my site, the vote came down as 39 teachers for the contract and 15 against, or 14 against. The contract was 14 no's, essentially. And that was with a lot of, with our chapter chair and our area rep selling it hard to us. But it was interesting because our families, our parents, spoke out very vocally against the contract. They called for a no vote, and so did our students.
Wow.
And at the end of the day, what won out was this incredible confidence in the union leadership, that if this is what they're putting before us, right, they are the experts and we believe in them and we trust them. And therefore we need to support them with a yes. And also just this fear that if we voted no, whatever happened afterwards, we would be far weaker, right? Those are the arguments that were presented. Yeah.
So that was a 2-hour process. What was that like to have that community discussion? There's this scene in the movie Land and Freedom where the community is discussing how they're going to deal with the fight that they're waging against the fascists, you know, like, and what was that experience like with that discussion you had for about 2 hours?
Honestly, it was beautiful. It was beautiful to see our students stand up and say what they felt, to see that we had arrived at a point where our students could independently take positions and feel confident doing so. It was beautiful to see our families stand up and say what they felt. One of our 4th graders gave a speech for a no vote. It literally brought me to tears, right? This kid was like, we are selling ourselves short.
Wow.
Right? And I don't want my teachers to give up. Right? And that was beautiful because we truly engaged with each other as equals. It was something I did not expect to see ever. It was definitely contentious. Yeah. Right? And I think, you know, I would like to have time to debrief with families and know how they felt. I think it was probably very hard for them to hear students and families saying they wanted a no vote, and to have such a strong argument from the union leaders who they love and respect for a yes vote. I think that was hard. And I think teachers were really, really afraid during the process because I think they were really scared that they would disappoint parents and students. And teachers talked about that today and they cried. Mm-hmm. They said, you know, they went into their advisories and did community circle, and some kids were like, this was all for nothing. You didn't win enough. And like teachers literally broke down, right? And we're like, the one thing we wanted our community to leave with more than anything that's in the contract, we wanted this community to know that you can strike and you can win. Yeah. And if we failed in that, nothing that's in the contract matters, right? So you know, it was contentious.
How was it for you that first day back?
I found myself navigating a lot of conversations about what a victory is, right? And I think that's one of the questions that I am left with and will continue to be thinking about is, well, what is a victory, right? I talked to students who told me they felt that we had won nothing. And that's not, it's frankly not true, right? So it's concerning. I talked to students who on the other hand felt like we'd won everything, right? And trying to help our community to feel like we can acknowledge and own and celebrate our victories while still acknowledging that we have more to fight for, and having the courage to say we're still in this fight and it's not done and it's not over and it's going to be long and it's going to be hard. Like, that was what I found myself trying to move people towards. But it's hard. And some of my colleagues, you know, feel very hurt that I advocated for a no vote. They feel you know, there are people on my staff who blame me for students feeling that way. And, you know, I think I'm glad that we're at the point where we can have open conversations about strategy. I'm grateful that we've gotten to this point, even if people are upset with me, because I think we're going to push past this. And I think that there's a lot of political development that's going to come from it. So.
Well, I certainly commend you for your strong position.
That's awesome. I mean, it takes a lot of courage. I mean, I voted no on every one of our tentative agreements, but it is harder to do that after you've put your butt on the line. The thing I will say, Claire, and I caught some of your texts early on. I sensed in those first few days of the strike that you guys were you felt a little overwhelmed, and you were a little like what the heck's going on? Like, that was my sense. So can you say something about that? Because then maybe it seemed like you caught your wind later in the strike as opposed to those first few days, where I described it in the way that I was telling the guy who I roll with in jiu-jitsu. My first match in jiu-jitsu, I was terrified. And I have this adrenaline dump. So in the first 30 seconds, even though I'm in good shape, I'm exhausted in 30 seconds, even though I got a 5-minute match to go, because we have so little experience in the fight, and I wonder, it's something I thought about as I was listening to you, because you were ready, and yet we haven't done this. So in many ways, we couldn't be ready.
Right. Yeah. That's it. We could not emotionally, psychologically, physically prepare for the day-to-day of picketing and thinking and strategizing and responding to conflict after conflict and challenge after challenge. I know a lot of teachers, and I am totally not exempt from this, who thought once we are on strike, I will get a break. I will go out and take a day at 4 p.m. I'm going to go home, no lesson planning, show up the next day. This is going to feel easy compared to teaching, and nobody believes that anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Today, teacher said, my God, today felt easy compared to being on strike. Because there's so many difficult questions. There's difficult questions about how to, lovingly try and encourage the solidarity of your colleagues who are crossing your line, while still holding to the concept of the picket line is you don't cross it, right? There's challenges of how to encourage people's leadership. There's challenges of emotionally supporting your colleagues through what we're going through, of emotionally supporting parents and students, of constant outreach, constantly explaining. I mentioned I was on strike with the grocery workers more than a decade ago, more than 15 years ago, right? That strike, those 5 months on strike, felt easy compared to this. And I'm still trying to process why. I think, one, just the amount of explaining and trying to reach people that we did on the picket lines was, 15-fold what I did as a grocery worker, right? My picket lines as a grocery worker were essentially just walk, keep cars out of the parking lot. That was it. This emotionally took a much bigger toll. And it's just a lot more, it was 55 teachers. That's a lot of people to coordinate with. There's not 55 people working at a grocery store, right? So trying to make sure that everyone's on the same page, it takes a lot of work. And I don't think anyone can prepare for it. I think that if I could make a recommendation, it would be to go in knowing that you're going to have to figure it out as you go. You're going to have to reevaluate. You're going to make mistakes. There are going to be moments where you feel incredibly stupid because you don't know what to do. Like when the police tell you that what you're saying your rights are not your rights. You're like, but I don't understand, and just like it requires a lot of emotional and physical space, right, to be able to do that. I think a lot of my coworkers regret not having those conversations with their families in advance about the level of commitment that they would need to give to the strike. Yeah.
If we could zoom out from the LA strike for a bit, and we were just to ask the question on a larger picture politically, how does this strike connect to the kind of world you believe we need to fight for?
I think that this is a fight over public services and over fundamental rights. And I think that, I will say this again and again, the symbolic victories we won in the strike are way bigger than anything in the contract, right? The fact that parents were on the line asserting and taking as their own our slogan that education is a right, quality public education is a right that's worth defending, connects to a vision of a world where people's needs are actually provided for, where they are guaranteed, right? And where it's our social responsibility as a society to care for human beings and to put their needs above money and above profit. So I think this was like, public services have been eroded and eroded and eroded, and what people think they're entitled to, what they think that a government and a society should provide them to be able to live a quality life, that those concepts have disappeared, right? We've seen our public services just be parceled off to NGOs that one day they're there, the next day they close, right? So to see community come out and say education is the line. This is where we draw the line, and we're going to defend it to the max. Even charter school teachers saying that. I mean, I don't think I talked sufficiently about that, but I think this has a big impact on charter school teachers. I think that this is one of the fundamental battle lines that is going to push us towards the type of society that I want to live in, a society that's not based on profit, but that's based on human needs, where humans democratically run that society together. And so, I would say some of the contract demands that felt fluffy. One of the questions I have in terms of thinking about the world that I want to live in is there power in even putting a fluffy demand in the contract versus just having a very narrow contract that just has very concrete kind of bread and butter things, right? And what I think, and I'm not sure about this, but what I think is that even those fluffy demands, that those help our community to say, no, these are rights. These are terrains of struggle that we can enter, that we can fight around, and where we can make gains. So things like the random searches, right? The right to not be criminalized in your school. Things like immigration lawyers provided by the district, paid for, right, by the district through our public money. Things like more green space, less testing. These are all things the district told us were not even issues that we as teachers could have a say in. And by forging into that territory and forcing those things to be negotiated on, even when courts told us that we didn't have any legal right to bring them up, we opened up space for reclaiming of rights and for communities in our community to feel like we can expand what we're willing to fight for.
Two questions, actually. They're not really related. One is, for those of people who voted no, essentially they were saying, no, we want to carry on the strike. Do you think people were prepared to carry on the strike if they had voted no, gone through that? And that is, did you feel people were falling out of energy, or was your energy growing? It's like a momentum kind of question prior to the agreement being settled. And then I have a second question.
I think that our energy was growing, and I think the union prepared us to stay out longer. I mean, we had a chapter chair meeting on Saturday where the union said, look, we've been out 5 days. West Virginia was out 13 school days. We need to be ready to go beyond 13. We need to be ready to stay out as long as it takes, right? So I think that people were not enthusiastic about staying out longer, and that's fair, right? Because one day longer, one day stronger, that's bullshit, right? Every day that's out, we're losing money. Yep. And the district isn't, right? They're still in their fancy houses eating their fancy dinners. Yep. So, finishing fast, that's good. That's what we want to do. We want to go strong, and we want to get what we need as fast as we can. But that said, I think people were willing to stay out longer. And I know that the people who voted yes at my school were willing to stay out longer too, right? Yeah. I mean, they said that. They said, look, I'm voting yes, but if it comes down as a no, I'm not going to go back inside. I'm not going to cross the picket line. I will stay out, right? The bigger question is public support, and I think that obviously is the one that keeps teachers who are striking up at night is like, well, will the public continue to support us? But I think now, a day later, all indications are that the public would have.
Yeah. What was the total vote, not just at your site, but for the union? What was the percentage for yes versus no?
As far as I know, they have not released that yet. I've heard rumors about it all day, but I looked on their website and I haven't seen anything that says it. They just keep saying it's overwhelming. But I also saw today that they said they've extended voting to Friday because there's been, a wave of complaints that we did not have sufficient time to understand what we were voting on. So I don't think we're going to know that tonight for sure.
Okay.
All right.
Last question. How do you feel like you've been changed through this experience?
This experience has left me with a lot of questions. It's reaffirmed my belief that strikes are the most powerful tool that I know of for developing working class consciousness and self-organization. Nothing my union has done up to now, nothing has come even close to this, right? We seized and took over completely the narrative about charter schools in the city, right? We involved the entire city in taking a position on public education. We involved, hundreds and hundreds of families at every single school in the city, and struggle had never been involved before, right? So that's very confirming of the absolute need for strikes. There is no way to maintain working class organization without this tool, right? So that it has affirmed. It's raised a lot of questions for me that I want to continue to think about. Questions like, how do we give the working class confidence in its own abilities while being real about the victories we've achieved, right? Mm-hmm. What do we say internally to ourselves about those victories, what we've truly achieved and what remains to be won, versus what do we say externally to people? Questions about what is the role of a vote, right? And what are the messages that our votes send and to who, right? And how do we strategically leverage that to push forward struggle? Questions about what we want from contracts and from demands. Do we want, this question of like, is there value in these fluffy demands that still expand the realm of what we're fighting for and are symbolic and assert symbolic rights, right? Is there value in that? And to what extent, this contract dealt almost not at all with very pressing issues of our working conditions. Is that a problem, right? Is that a flaw in our contract? This was in many ways a teacher martyr contract fight. We were in it for our kids, and we didn't raise anything for ourselves, right? So is that the wrong approach, or is that right? It feels deeply right to me in this moment, right? And I want to leave that open and continue to think about that. I think those are the really, really big ones. And then also, what does it mean to strike as a public servant? What is the role of your picket line, right? And how do we do this well? Yeah. For a long time, I've been very uncomfortable with this idea of you win the strike through public opinion, and now I'm thinking about it more. Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oakland teachers are organizing.
Yes.
Yes. Do you have any words for
and potentially other unions, syndicates, right? No?
Denver just voted to their first strike vote in 25 years.
Yeah. So there seems to be something going on in the air or in the water that is inspiring other teachers from West Virginia to Oklahoma to Arizona to even some of the past strikes from Chicago. Do you have anything that you want to leave future potential striking teachers? Any message, any advice, anything that you want to leave as inspiring?
Or not inspiring, just, whatever.
Just in general, something that you want to share from your experience.
I think one thing that I learned in the strike that I think is of great value is that the most important thing in a contract fight is to get to the strike itself. Because so much will change if you can strike and strike powerfully. There were moments in my strike where our union took demands off the table that they had been putting forward because of legal opposition, right? Because of legal challenges to those demands. And I thought, oh my God, what are they doing, right? And there was this internal email that came out from one of our board of directors, and he said, look, this is about getting us to a strike because we are not going to win any of these demands in a courtroom, facing off lawyer versus lawyer, right? And that was a moment that gave me great confidence in that orientation of our leadership because the legalistic process is against us. The timeline is against us, right? But we can use those things to our advantage. We can leverage them to build for the 20 months that we negotiate. That's absurd, right? But those 20 months, we built our power. And when we struck powerfully, and we forced issues onto the table that we could have never gotten onto the table any other way. So the power of striking, make it happen.
I don't think people really understand how significant this is in history. This is the largest city in all of California, one of the largest cities in the USA, and in a blue state that you would think, the perception is that California is very progressive. And I don't remember anything right now hearing from our new governor of California, Gavin Newsom, around the strike. But I will say that it is just something that has to keep going. The momentum has to continue around the country, and hopefully other, not just teachers, but other unions as well participate that can really cause change for themselves as the working class. I don't know if you have any last things you want to say before.
Best interview ever. That's what I have to say. This is my favorite episode of What's Left right now.
And hopefully my former or your union now is inspired to
Oakland, hopefully Oakland goes and then gets San Francisco next in about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, and if Oakland goes on strike, yes, you're right, Gavin Newsom said almost nothing, right? But if Oakland goes on strike, he is squarely the target, and we are going to expand this movement from fighting over the crumbs that our local boards of education had for us and going after where the money is really at, right? And I think that would be a huge step. And the same if Denver goes on strike, right? Let's expand it, right?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll just say, Claire, thank you. One, thank you for being willing to let our school adopt you, because we got more out of this deal than you did. Say it. I'm sorry.
We are so grateful.
Yeah. And it's been people have had an immense interest in what's going on with your school. I think it's given us a direct, immediate connection to the strike, as opposed to the media wasn't obviously going to help us learn about what was happening. And so I really appreciate that. And
can you just say what it means to adopt another school, just very quickly, for some listeners that are not teachers?
Well, and it's a model that came from the Teacher Rising group in the Bay Area, and the idea was that, contact a school who's going on strike and see if your school will adopt them, and find out ways you can concretely and spiritually give solidarity and support, and just kind of make you feel like you have a lifeline at the point of the strike. But also, for those of us not involved in the strike, how do we get to feel as if we're part of it? I mean, ultimately, what has to happen is we have to go on strike when you go on strike. That has to happen ultimately, illegal or illegal. In fact, it's illegal, but we have to do it. But this is a bit of a step in that direction. So yeah, so thank you for that, and
yes.
Yeah, and thank you for taking this time. You said you were nervous about this interview. I can't understand what she was nervous about.
It seems like you've been on the front covers pretty often or something. No, really, it has been really a pleasure listening to you. I think your interview is much more informative than some of other ones I have seen online on YouTube. It's very, just, you went into depth, and part of what's left is that we do give the space of more, even, I don't know how long we've gone right now, but even more than an hour than regular, media snapshots of interviews of teachers.
If anybody says this episode is too long, they are brain dead, they've got no heart, there's something wrong with them. Because I was just transfixed listening. So I think it's what you've said is very important. I hope we can discuss it later, either whether it's on what's left, but I know you and I will continue to be in discussion about these things. Because I think the questions you've raised are big ones.
And I will be sharing this with many of my teacher friends for sure.
I'm going to have everyone at Mission see this, so, I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you. Really, really. I'm just going...
We have to say our little thing here, but you have to stay on.
Yeah, we're just going to give out, just so people can find us. And so people can find us on BitChute, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and of course YouTube. Our major traffic is on iTunes, and we encourage everyone to especially share, but most rate, review, what else? Just share with everyone, really just...
And listen to this whole damn episode.
Subscribe, that's what I wanted to say, yes. Thank you.
Subscriber and a fan. And I'd be on it.
All right, Claire. Well, I guess that's it.
That concludes our episode. So we're pretty much done with that.
Then we will see everyone next week for maybe question and answers, or we'll figure out where to go from next.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. And
generally I start the introduction. I don't know if you've seen any of the videos, and then
I've never seen the video version. That's why I was like, whoa.
All right. So generally I start, and I will start, but this time I will have Andy, since you both know each other, introduce you, and then after that then I will ask you just a few questions. But first we'll have Andy introduce you. Yeah? All right, perfect. So I'm just going to... It's part of our...
This is our set, man. Duct tape. Only the best for us.